So careful reading is important, and that is why I would suggest you to always sit with a laptop on when you're doing the Q bank, and rather sit on a chair and a table and try to do these questions with utmost confidence. Like imagine you are in an exam scenario, because the more you replicate the exam scenario on a regular basis, that is when the palpitations in the exam will be minimal and your ability to focus will be there. I have seen most people, they think they will be able to do it, but after half an hour, 1 hour, they tend to get tired sitting in front of a laptop. Then mobile phone will come out, you'll check out your status, etc., etc. So I would suggest you to practice what I've already highlighted so many times: internet darkness. When you're studying, there should be no internet which is gonna relate to social media. Right, obviously you would need internet to listen to my data, or you can download the data to your device and listen to that. That's another option which a lot of brilliant people have done. In fact, when I talked to a couple of people of the recently concluded November INICT paper, a lot of chaps, they were off social media for 6 months, 8 months, 1 year. I mean, they deleted their accounts altogether. You can listen to the videos on the YouTube channel of Prep Ladder, and even on my social media profiles, sometimes these videos are there. I mean, look at the dedication. No social media, no social accounts, and some people even changed their phones. And they changed their phone to that simple, 2000, 3000 rupees wala phone, which very poor people will be using, because just phone hi to sunna hai, right? So, I mean, that's just advice from my side, which I think you can practice. Moving to the next question, is talking about a 30-year-old patient with loose stools, lower abdominal pain, weight loss, diarrhea, passage of blood and mucus. So lots of information given, and then there's a sigmoidoscopic view which is showing lots of polyps. The question is saying all are true statements regarding this condition except, so first you need to understand from the image and the clinical information provided of loose stools, abdominal pain, diarrhea, and even blood, sometimes familial adenomatous polyposis is to be considered. More than 100 colonic adenomas are diagnostic of this condition. True. Polyps and malignant tumors can develop in the duodenum and the small bowel. Well, FAP is mainly a condition affecting the large bowel. Does it cause small bowel involvement? Yes, this may or may not be correct statement if I'm not aware. I'm thinking from your perspective, you may not have read from the textbook, so sometimes a statement might be appearing a little fishy. So, okay, no problems. We'll keep it in the back of my mind. Let's read C. This condition is associated with benign mesodermal tumors like desmoid tumors and osteomas. He's here basically talking about Gardner syndrome, because associations are always Gardner or Turcot. So Gardner syndrome can be having the desmoid tumors and osteomas, and Turcot is related to brain tumors. The condition is associated with APC gene on chromosome number 4. Now you are aware of the fact that APC gene is located on chromosome number 5. So definitely D is the wrong statement. And what I'm saying is that you have to be aware of this fact that familial adenomatous polyposis, the lesions can be occurring even in the small bowel. Major of them are obviously in the large bowel, but there is a involvement of the small bowel as well, and even cancers can develop in the small bowel also in this condition. The correct answer for this multiple choice question is option number delta. Moving to 9. A 32-year-old woman presented with history of multiple hematomas scattered through the small intestine, and she is coming to you for a follow-up, and you definitely can notice her mucosal melanosis on the lips. Also, if you look at the histopathology image given, there is a very characteristic manifestation of the polyps which is given here, that is called as arborization pattern. In fact, this word I want you to remember, arborization, like plants growing. So arborization of the polyps is given in the histopathological domain, and he's saying all are true but this condition except. It is STK11 gene mutation. We know that polyps can be in the jejunum. In fact, that's the most common side. Morbidity due to interstitial obstruction. True, polyps present anywhere, once they become bigger, they can definitely affect interstitial motility. Polyps can either be responsible for intussusception or they can cause interstitial obstruction as well. Autosomal recessive, that's the problem here. It is autosomal dominant, as I've highlighted in the main lecture as well. So this was relatively an easy one. I usually find people not messing up on Peutz-Jeghers because it's a straightforward topic, but I want to remind a aspect to you right now. In Peutz-Jeghers syndrome, though the polyps are present in the jejunum, they may not actually cause a cancer of the small bowel. In fact, in this person, you might be having a hepatobiliary cancer. In fact, I've highlighted in the main app that in these patients, extra-intestinal cancers can develop. So even carcinoma cervix, carcinoma ovary might be developing in these patients. So the peculiar thing about Peutz-Jeghers is that though there are problems per se in the jejunum, the cancer might be developing somewhere else also. So that aspect should be kept in mind. The next question talks about a pregnant female, 28 years of age, with vomiting of blood after multiple episodes of vomiting. So we are suspecting she could be having hyperemesis gravidarum. On upper GI endoscopy, you definitely can make out in this case a tear present. We need to identify the tear. The diagnosis of this patient would be given as Mallory-Weiss syndrome. The question is saying, what is the most common site of this lesion? You are familiar with the fact that in Mallory-Weiss, the commonest site that is involved is the gastroesophageal junction. However, when you will read the options, you will see that he has very smartly written the word gastroduodenal junction. B is not the answer to this question, guys, because gastroduodenal nahi. It's gastroesophageal junction where it is present. The correct answer for this question is option number A, cardia, because the tear actually starts from the stomach, that is from the cardia, and goes in a reverse direction towards the sphincter. The correct answer to this question is option number A. I have seen people casually answering Mallory-Weiss as being the tear of the esophagus. No guys, it's not a tear in the esophagus. The problem starts in the stomach because you see it's forceful reverse peristalsis. That's causing the tear. Reverse peristalsis starts from the cardia and roaches onto the sphincter. So the tear is going in a retrograde fashion, but when you will put a scope from the top, you will be able to see the tear actually at the lower esophageal sphincter. I want to highlight this point, guys, that you see the tear is gonna go in a retrograde fashion, but when you do a scope evaluation, upper GI endoscopy, you are able to first see the tear at the lower esophageal junction. So the impression among students is that the tear is extending from the sphincter to the cardia. No, I'm saying it is opposite because I said the word reverse peristalsis. Moving to the next one, he talks about a 28-year-old IV drug abuser presenting with vomiting, jaundice, and right hypochondrium pain. So the correct diagnosis of mine would be a possible acute viral hepatitis, because if he's himself telling you IV drug user, viral hepatitis will always come in your mind. He's asking you ultrasound abdomen is showing presence of, A says amoebic liver abscess. I'm ruling out amoebic liver abscess. Why? Because it should be having a hypoechoic lesions. I mean, I cannot see any relatively gray area per se. So hypoechoic lesion, which would be having an Anchovy Fospas subsequently, is not visualized in this case. You definitely can see, if I just zoom in, some areas of biliary radicals and some white spots at various places, but per se there is no hypoechoic zone that is seen. B says acute viral hepatitis. So yeah, that is definitely a possibility in this case based on the clinical history. C says acute cholecystitis. Now with cholecystitis, it is unlikely to have jaundice. The reason why I have ruled out option number C is primarily because jaundice is given unless and until it is Mirizi syndrome, where the stone goes and impacts into the Hartmann pouch or maybe into the distal part of the cystic duct. That's where jaundice can occur, but routinely cholecystitis does not contribute to jaundice. D says hepatocellular carcinoma. So diagnosing cancer immediately with help of ultrasound is definitely not a very wise thing. I mean, with hepatocellular carcinoma, there should be more clinical information given in the form of weight loss, cachexia, stony hard consistency of the liver edge. So unless and until you read about the terms that I said, diagnosing hepatocellular carcinoma would be the last thing on my mind with this particular chap having an acute presentation. The correct answer to this MCQ is option number beta, which can be picked up even on clinical info. So what was the need of giving an image? Well, all these white spots which are present here gives this a classical name, a starry sky liver. So like you are familiar with the fact that starry sky pattern is red with respect to kidney, and you are aware of the diagnosis, that is post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis. You read about starry sky pattern on neurocysticercosis. Today I'm just highlighting a starry sky liver also. That's a feature that you will encounter with acute viral hepatitis. The next question talks about CT abdomen of a 10-year-old child with high-grade fever for last 5 days. And this child would be having some kind of abdominal pain due to which the CT abdomen was done. You can visualize the liver, you can visualize some part of the spleen, and you definitely can notice this area which looks as if the liver tissue is destroyed. The grayish area that is highlighted here is the one which is showing some kind of a damage. It could either be some growth or it could be some local destruction. Option A says typholytic colitis. I am ruling out typholytic colitis. Why? Because there is no colon that is seen here. We talk about the liver. It looks to be a liver abscess. Let's read C. Acute pancreatitis, ruled out because there is no pancreas visualized here. Biloma. Meaning of the word biloma would simply be extrahepatic collections of bile. This can usually be a complication of gallbladder surgery. If the T-tube is not functioning or there was a bile leak during surgery, then extrahepatic bile accumulation in the peritoneal cavity is called as biloma, which can be evaluated with the help of a CT. But the point here is that considering the lesion is present in the liver and showing a destruction, my first differential diagnosis for this patient would be a liver abscess. It mostly would be a amoebic liver abscess. If not a amoebic liver abscess, it could be a pyogenic, but pyogenic usually is multicentric. Whereas in this case, if it's a single isolated lesion, first benefit or doubt should be given for that as an amoebic liver abscess. The next question says all are true but the clinical sign elicited except. So you can see that this person is on his arms. I'll just highlight. What we are showing in this case is that this patient has been made to go on his force. You are making an adult patient, a grown-up patient, go on his force like this. Now why are you doing it? Well, you are trying to pick up for presence of any fluid in the peritoneal cavity of this guy, which is that if a person is having ascites and it's of little minimal amount, if you will make this person go on his force like at the movement, and then if you are gonna percuss, you definitely may be able to feel the dullness of the fluid because of gravity, the fluid will tend to come against the anterior abdominal wall. In fact, you can even put your stethoscope and you can flick and you can feel the turbulence in the fluid present. Let's read the options. Used for detection of peritoneal fluid as little as 120 ml of fluid. Please appreciate that in this image, in this question, I am trying to test your knowledge about puddle sign and ascites. Puddle sign is for minimal ascites where amount of fluid would be something in the range of less than 100 ml or 120 ml as is given here. So option A is the correct one. B says sign is false positive in massive splenomegaly. Yeah, I mean the spleen is very big and you might be percussing over the spleen, even that will give you a dull node. So is a decently okay statement. This method is as sensitive as ultrasound for detection of ascites? Unlikely, man. I mean, ascites can be best diagnosed by ultrasound, where only 50 ml, maybe 30 ml fluid can also be identified. So unlikely. C is looking like the probable answer. Let's read on. Can be elicited by ausculto percussion method. Yes, I mean, you can percuss or you can auscultate, flick, and you can feel the movement of the fluid, or you can hear the turbulence in the fluid. The correct answer to this particular question is option number C. The method is as sensitive as detection of ascites with ultrasound. Well, I can just say that if a person is having minimal ascites, you obviously will use technology. Technology would mean an ultrasound or a CT, and ultrasound is very handy. So the sensitivity of all these investigations is much higher as compared to the scale that you and me might possess. I mean, I might have seen lots of cases of ascites, but when it comes to 100 ml of fluid in peritoneal cavity of a 6 feet tall person, or in a relatively obese lady, 100 ml of fluid in peritoneal cavity, it may be easily missed up by you, which is the reason why technology will be superior to a doctor's experience in this case. The answer to this question is option number Calcutta. We move to the next one. A boy baby is brought at 3 weeks of age with non-bilious vomiting. I mean, the standard whenever you read, boy, gender being boy, 3 weeks of presentation is always gonna be a congenital hypertrophic pyloric stenosis. If I change this scenario to that of a boy 3 days of age, if the presentation is 3 days of age, let me say, and the child is brought with bilious vomiting, then obviously the diagnosis will change to option number A. And anyway, congenital hypertrophic pyloric stenosis tends to be present at 3 weeks of age with recurrent episodes of vomiting, and we'll do a Ramstead procedure for this. There will also be associated hypokalemic metabolic alkalosis seen in this case. The next question talks about a 25-year-old chap who presented with severe right iliac fossa pain and tenderness. So he was operated with the diagnosis of acute appendicitis, and when the surgeon noted a defect 2 feet away from ileocecal junction, I mean, a piece of cake, a defect present 2 feet away. I hope you can recall the rule of 2. So we're talking about Meckel's diverticulum in this case. You see, diverticulitis will always occur in geriatric age group. The presentation of diverticulitis is lower GI bleeding, and this person will always be having a left iliac fossa pain, whereas in this MCQ it is right iliac fossa pain. So A and B are anywhere ruled out. Anterogenous cyst will always be a lump in the abdomen. It will be lump with respect to the mesentery. You see, the mesentery, if this is the abdomen of the person, this is umbilicus, this is groin, and if I just represent the mesentery here, then this anterogenous cyst or a chylolymphatic cyst will always be a cystic swelling related to the umbilicus or in paraumbilical area, and the mobility of a anterogenous cyst is very characteristically given perpendicular to the plane of the mesentery. You are aware of discussion of anterogenous and chylolymphatic cyst from surgery also. In chylolymphatic we go in for resection, whereas in anterogenous it would be resection plus end-to-end anastomosis. The reason is anterogenous will involve a part of the gut also. This is not an anterogenous cyst, primarily because there's no issues related to the motility described in a person with a periumbilical lump. It is rather a guy who came to you with severe right iliac fossa pain. You made a presenter diagnosis, and that's the classical line from Bailey and Love that lots of patients who are being operated upon for appendicitis may actually also be found to have a Meckel's diverticulum that may be inflamed. The answer to this question is option number D. The next question was having a Scotch tape specimen on which some eggs were present. Lots of people, they actually could not recognize these eggs, but they just remembered that Scotch tape is which is used for evaluation and diagnosis of Enterobius vermicularis. You're aware that this worm, Enterobius vermicularis, it comes out of the anus of the child at night and it causes a lot of itching in the perianal area. You're all aware that whenever you are gonna get in your OPD a child from low socioeconomic state of the society and he cries a lot at night and he scratches his perineal area, pruritus ani, you always have to think in terms of enterobius vermicularis, and for evaluation or diagnosis on confirmation, you would be doing a Scotch tape test. And when we evaluated it, we could see these eggs which are having a plano, or I would say concavo convex shape. But even if I'll leave the shape of the eggs to the microbiologist, but I just want to highlight that even at low magnification, even if you're not able to identify the eggs per se, the additional information given in the question will also help you. The answer to this question is option number alpha. The next one talks about this 40-year-old alcoholic who went for binge drinking with his friends. Multiple episodes of retching, vomiting occurring in this guy. The last episode, he vomited frank blood and developed chest pain followed by prostration. On examination, crepitus is noted in the anterior chest wall. The moment you read crepitus in the anterior chest wall, you nailed the diagnosis. Because you are familiar about the fact that whenever you read about combination of chest pain with crepitus with vomiting, if you look at these three things together, we are talking about macular striate. I don't need to even evaluate the X-ray of this person, though I'll do it for you. The moment you read about the combination of these three things, you nailed the diagnosis. That's gonna be Boyer syndrome. And the X-ray of this person, one of the very characteristic manifestations is where I put an arrow already for you. You can notice evidence of air just below the skin. This X-ray basically shows subcutaneous emphysema, plus the haziness in the X-ray is primarily because of the chemical mediastinitis component that will definitely come up in this case. You see, whatever alcohol he had consumed, the saliva of this guy, the snacks that he had taken, everything can spill over into the peritoneal cavity. So chemical mediastinitis explains why there is severe chest pain in this condition. Otherwise, rupture of the esophagus should not cause chest pain, but it is chemical mediastinitis. And why did he become unconscious? That could be vasovagal syncope. You see, if there's a perforation of a viscus, if there's a rupture of any part of the intestine, then there's a distinct possibility that vasovagal syncope can contribute to initial prostration in this guy, and his friends had to, put him on the back seat of their car or get an ambulance. Nowadays, getting an ambulance is also a big deal, no? Because most of the ambulances would be busy in a COVID duty. So maybe his friends put him in the back seat of the car, rushed to a hospital, and that's gonna be a standard presentation with Boyer syndrome. Coming to the last one, he is talking about comment on the location of the foreign body. Lots of debate on this question when this actually came, because you definitely can see a coin or what looks like a coin and is present right bang in the middle of the chest of this guy. Well, in this pediatric case, the appearance of lungs is smaller, so I'm taking it to be a pediatric case. It is unlikely to be trachea, guys. Why? Because if somebody is having a foreign body in the trachea, he's not gonna make it to the hospital. Not make it to the hospital. Most of the time, person will die on the transit to the hospital. But in this case, you can see that this swelling, this face of the coin is definitely can be made out. It's impacted in the esophagus. The correct answer to this question is option number C. Do not answer airway, because people with airway impaction, and most of the time whenever there is a airway impaction, the coin shadow will be seen from the lateral side. The coin will get impacted right above the epiglottis. So therefore the airway occlusion will occur. So if it's gonna be ever a foreign body related to airway occlusion, it is the lateral aspect of the foreign body, which is like a coin in this case, that can be picked up. But this could be like a 1 rupee coin or whatever, 5 rupees coin, which is relatively small. And kids, small kids, they put everything in their mouth, especially with mouthing coming up. kids, if they are having, it could be dry fruit, it could be raisins getting impacted. And I mean, you get very nasty cases in tertiary care hospital of foreign bodies being aspirated by especially infants or children between, age of 9 months, when the pincer grasp is coming, to up to 2 years of age. And then they tend to get over this habit of at least picking up the small objects and then